What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. So I did actually want to make another video on the motorcycles here in Need for Speed Unbound. Now, the reason for that is probably coming down to the fact of actually doing the playlist video for them, or at least comparing the actual bike PvP playlist to Motorfest not having any. I was like, you know what, bro? I feel like people are probably going to struggle a bit with these bikes until they figure out tricks with them. Well, guess what? I was doing a bunch of playlists, and I think I've actually figured out ways to get faster with them. So jumping right into this, the first thing I did notice is I do know people don't like to use it, but guys, manual for the motorcycles is incredible, like legit, hear me out. I do understand automatic is probably going to be easier, and in some ways I know people don't want to shift, but for the motorcycles, this can also go for the cars in the game. Shifting the bike legit makes it so much faster, man, not even kidding. There's going to be a few reasons why though, so for a few things like you'll be able to push the bike into higher gear and most likely push it into a higher RPM and then shift it. You can also control where the RPMs are, meaning when you are going into a corner you might actually be braking or something like that. Normally with automatic, well, you just hit the rear brake, right, and slow down. After that, with a manual though, you can actually downshift and fly into the corner. Funny thing is, guys, when using the motorcycle, I was actually beating a lot of people with it because I wasn't braking that much in the corners. Like, don't get me wrong, sometimes I would have to brake, but most of the time, though, I would actually downshift one or two gears and fly around the corner. And what's funny about that, though, is I legitimately lost track the amount of times I'd fly around people going around the corners. Like, they would end up braking, I can see the taillight coming on the bike, and I'd be like, alright, let me downshift a gear or two. I'd fly around the corner and legitimately pass them. It is so dang insane, guys, running manual on the motorcycle. I did notice going around most corners, I would say maybe 90% of them, like not the super tight ones. Normally, second gear is the gear you can be in to go around them. I don't know what it is if you are running automatic, but I would probably say it's going to be a gear too high and even a gear too low. Most of the time, though, when running automatic, you'd probably come out of that corner in third gear, right? Funny thing is, in second gear, you can actually power into the corner and out of it, and then upshift once you max in the RPM, which is going to make you faster every single time. When I was doing some of the playlists, like, don't get me wrong, guys, I would have bad starts and stuff. I would see players ahead of me. I actually started in 8th place in a few of the races and still won them. I would actually see people ahead. I'd end up downshifting, flying into the corner. I would catch up to people so dang quick. Now, there's going to be a few things about the corners, though, that I also want to mention. If you can, try to avoid slamming your brakes in the corners. It does slow you down a bit. Now, I do understand sometimes you might be trying to go as fast as you possibly can in a straightaway. Don't worry, because I have done the exact same thing way too many times to where I have to slam my brakes in that corner. But the more I was actually using the bike, I would be going around these tracks trying to learn them a bit. I would end up downshifting. I would find myself barely running the brakes, which again is always going to make you faster. Like, you would end up pulling away from the other players. They won't be able to even catch you. Sometimes being able to put that bike into first gear around a super tight corner instead of being in second gear when you probably would be in automatic is also going to make you faster coming out of that said corner. So there is going to be a few things to note there. Also, guys, a big tip on all the races you're probably going to notice going over a curb can actually mess you up a bit, bro. I like actually noticed going over them, the bike would spin out, you'd actually lose traction going over around a turn or something over a curb. You would also lose traction, even spin out at times, so watch out for those. And also, being in a bunch of these playlists, doing races, I was actually noticing players trying to cut a lot of the corners, which would probably make sense. But doing that, actually going over some of the curves would make the bike spin out, you'd lose traction a bit. So if you're actually not going over the curb, now I also want to explain this here quick though. I'm not saying do not cut the corner and go over the curb, but when you do go over it, be careful and do not turn the bike super tight when going off or onto it, because the rear tire or the front tire is going to catch it. I've actually seen this a lot of times, guys. It's messed me up a good amount when racing, so do be careful on that. Like, if you go over it, don't turn the bike too hard on it. If you don't have to get back on the road, then go over the next curb, but try not to let the rear end spin out on the bike, because guess what? You're going to get squirrely. That can actually send you into a wall or something, which I also saw a good amount of people crashing on, trying to get over the curbs. They try to pass me a bit when I go around it. I would then actually see them try to go over the curb and cut that corner, and boom, they would end up losing traction. I would end up flying right by them. Also, one thing I was laughing about is I would notice when I would slow down a bit to go around the corner in like a lower gear, that way I didn't actually have to brake around it, players would actually fly past me a bit, slam their brakes, and guess what? I was still faster than them, man. Kind of hilarious. When it does come to like the overall speed of the bike though on the straightaways and all that, The big thing I can recommend is to, well, guys, not crash, which is probably, the most obvious thing ever. The thing is, though, if you are trying to draft the other players on motorcycles, you are not going to get a big boost of nitrous doing it that way. The best way I actually found is to go around the turns and make sure you're gripping them, which most of the time is a bike. You're probably not going to be drifting around the corners on a motorcycle, although that would be insanely fun to do. You're most likely going to get the boosted nitrous fairly often. On top of that, get in your cars as much as you can if you are racing. That is also going to get you more boosted nitrous in the events. I would say a lot of players, when actually playing the PvP playlists or using the motorcycles in their races, are most likely going to have such a great time once they get used to them. Don't get me wrong, guys, in some areas you're probably going to notice some wonkiness with the bikes. For me, I would say the biggest thing was probably on the racetrack areas where the bike would bounce or it would feel kind of wonky in some places, but then again, I noticed some of the cars also felt the exact same way on those races. They would also bounce around a bit, which is probably the really tight suspension on the bike or the car. So I guess in some ways it does probably make sense. So a few things I did actually want to conclude on top of that, guys. I guess you could say it's the three biggest tips I could recommend with the motorcycles. Number one is probably going to be fairly obvious, and that is get better with manual. I do understand not everybody likes to use it, but it's definitely going to make you faster, man, legit. It will. You'll actually be able to shift through the gears better, get around the corners better. It is legit so dang fun to use them in manual. Number two is probably going to be the corners. Now, I would say some of this can tie into being in manual because you can get around them quicker, but I would also recommend practicing in the corners because it does help a lot, though. Watching out for the curbs, getting around them the right way, being in the right gear, which again is manual, but also being able to get around that turn as quickly as possible without spinning out, hitting a car, going around the corner way too wide or something, going into that turn way too fast and having to brake. That is all going to slow you down and most likely make you lose that race. And then for number three, though, is probably going to sound a bit hilarious, but let me explain why, though. This is going to be fairly simple. Just because people are trying to be the fastest on the bike doesn't actually make them the fastest in the race. The reason why I say that is I saw so many people pushing the bike as quickly as they can in certain areas where I would actually end up slowing down and passing them in a lot of turns and all that, or even different straightaways because they were just not actually riding the bike correctly. Like, yes, you can go insanely fast, man, and probably go as quickly as you want in every single straightaway, but guess what? When there's a turn or something, you obviously have to slow down to get around the corner, which, fun fact, that's going to be a combination of the brakes and shifting down if you want to be quicker in them. But if you're actually looking to be faster, guys, sometimes trying to be the fastest on the bike isn't necessarily the way to do it. This is something I was noticing in many of the lobbies I was in. But again, let me know what you guys think about the motorcycles in the comments below. Are you enjoying them? Would you like to see more bikes added into Need for Speed? And the biggest question I actually have, though, would you like to see a big Year 3 update schedule for Need for Speed Unbound, hopefully being shown this year or the beginning of next year?